Okay, I see the numbers going up. So I would like to welcome everyone to the VEF Virtual Series Industry Track session. Today, we will explore COVID-19 recovery, focusing on SMEs and on local value chains. We're thrilled to have such a diverse and dynamic group today. To welcome you, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Nilken Tas. She is the Chief and Deputy Director at UNIDO. So, Ms. Tas, I will be giving you the floor right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. We still have some people attending, so I will give another 30 seconds before we start. Still increasing. I think we have now a more stable. Oh, okay, it changes still. I'm checking my clock. Okay, I suggest we start. Allow me to warmly welcome you again and thank you all for joining this session of the Vienna Energy Forum Virtual Series in the industry track. The session today will explore the role of renewable energy and energy efficiency in driving recovery in SMEs and local value chains. SMEs play crucial roles in industry, but often rely on generic and in many instances, outdated technology. Some SMEs were among the hardest hit by the impacts of COVID-19, while other SMEs have been more flexible and agile and innovated to adapt to the changing conditions and to seize the new opportunities that have emerged. Due to their important economic and social contributions in many economies, SMEs need to be considered when contemplating options for renewable energy-based post-COVID recovery. Promoting them can be an effective strategy for driving low-carbon industrialization, particularly in the global South, because the number of SMEs in industrial sectors is massive, and have continued to increase in line with increasing populations in the last decade. As such, industrial SMEs present a largely untapped potential for energy efficiency and renewable energy applications. SMEs also occupy various positions in value chains and therefore offer diverse entry points for improvements. Furthermore, SMEs are major employers and hold the potential to improve livelihoods and create new employment opportunities. Finally, as I said in the beginning, some SMEs have seized the new opportunities, for instance, through e-commerce platforms, growing digital payment platforms, and other innovations related to their production processes in these difficult times, and provide valuable lessons for COVID recovery. India is one of the countries where SMEs contribute about 1/3 of the GDP. In the first part of today's session, we will learn from Girish Sethi, Senior Director from the Energy and Resources Institute, the impact of COVID-19 on energy efficiency and renewables options in micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and the role that these two can play in post-COVID-19 recovery. Following the presentation, we will move into 3 moderated breakout sessions where our speakers will discuss the topic with a view on, in one session, global perspectives, where they are joined by experts from the Renewable Energy Partnership for the 21st Century, IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, AEE Intec, and the Renewable Energy Laboratory, as well as the International Energy Agency. In another session, Country Perspectives, where we will be joined by representatives from South Africa, Kenya, China, India, and perhaps others. In another session yet, the Enablers for Progress, where we will be joined by the experts from the Global Environment Facility, Econoler, the World Bank, the Council for Environment, Energy and Water, and the SDG 7 constituency for youth and children. After the discussions in the breakout rooms, we will come back to this plenary to hear back from the moderators of each group the outcomes of the discussion. Without further ado, I would like to turn to this scene-setting presentation. Girish, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, madam. I think you have already given a very nice, am I audible, I think? Is it okay? I guess so. Thank you. So you have already given a very nice overview globally. I'll touch in my brief presentation on the issue of SMEs and the local value chains, specifically with India focus. But I think many of the points which I will mention probably also hold true for many of the developing countries, SMEs, as well as in the developed world. Next slide. See that in case of India, as you can see from this background slide, I think globally we refer to as SME, small and medium enterprises, but in India we have a separate definition which we call it as the micro, small and medium enterprises, because micro is a fairly large segment in India's overall SME sector. This word micro, in fact, got incorporated almost, I would say, 17 or 18 years back as a part of the MSME Act, which was enacted by the Parliament of India. So, and in fact, very recently, during the COVID period itself, the Government of India redefined the definition of MSME by including the issues related to turnover as well as plant and machinery into the overall MSME sector. So as was mentioned during the introductory remarks, like in all parts of the world, India has a very vibrant and a large MSME sector. It is the backbone of India's manufacturing sector, contributing heavily to India's GDP, close to around 30% of the GDP. We have got more than 60 million MSME units in the country, providing huge employment next only to agriculture, as per many estimates. And one good part of the MSMEs in case of India is that you do see, at least the energy intensive MSMEs we see, many of them are occurring in the form of clusters, as we have seen in Europe also in many places. They are industrial clusters, some could be homogeneous clusters making similar products, or there could be heterogeneous clusters like in industrial estates in different parts of the country. What we have seen in case of India is that many of these MSMEs are generally, let me put it, using obsolete technologies. Some of them are pretty inefficient, and then which basically means that there are opportunities for them to really advance to energy efficient and RE technologies. We have close to around 200 SMEs, and when one really looks at the overall situation of the sector as a whole, generally one would say that the barriers which they are facing are related to access to technology, access to finance, and in terms of the skills. Can we go to the next one? Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So now coming to the COVID impacts, as some of you who would have followed India during this COVID crisis, we are still not away from that. India is one of the largest countries which is having the cases, second largest in the world even today. But India was one of the first countries to actually, can we go to the previous one slide? Yeah. So India was one of the first countries actually which imposed a very strict lockdown late in the last week of March, and it continued for at least 2 months. And then it was only in the month of around June that the unlockdown started, and then the industry started coming back on stream. So this whole process of the lockdown really impacted the whole manufacturing sector in a very big way. There were disruptions related to the raw materials, finished products. We also had issues related to when they are coming up, restarting, issues related to the working capital. We have a huge population, as I mentioned, and many of them are actually employed in the SME sector, but the whole country is not homogeneous in that fashion. So we do have a huge issue of people moving from one part of the country to the other part of the country. Some of you might have seen those videos where we had lots of migrant laborers moving from one part of from northern India and western India back to the eastern India, because lots of labor movement actually happens. So they were all impacted in this fashion because of the lockdown, which was imposed pretty suddenly in case of India. Now, as they are coming up, there are issues related to the revival of the demand in the SMEs, and all these SMEs are really linked with the large industries, as one can easily imagine. Can we go to the next one? So as I mentioned, I think there are many opportunities, as Ilgun mentioned in the initial presentation. There are many opportunities for SMEs as they revive and restart. Many of them have already started. You can see on the right side of this slide that I've tried to divide the greening of the SMEs into two parts, one related to the energy efficiency options and second related to the renewable energy options. When we talk about energy efficiency, I've been working in this field for many, many years, the greening part of the SMEs. One can clearly see major sections. One would be sort of replacement, second could be retrofitting or revamping, and third could be even simple best operating practices to really help them reduce their cost of production. We know that in SMEs, many of the cases you have almost 30 to 40% total cost of production is accounted for by energy. So if one is able to even reduce 5 or 10% of the total cost of production, it will be far better for them as well to increase their profitability. So options like new motors, new furnaces, efficient operation of boilers, reduction in the leakage of the steam systems. There are many options which are available for SMEs. And many of these are very low cost, no cost options. While in other cases, yes, you have to go for revamping where there will be some investments required. So it is probably an opportune time where governments across the world, including India, are providing a lot of stimulus. I'll come to that in the next slide. Are providing stimulus packages for the industries to really restart. And this is the time to really invest in new technologies. Same holds true for the renewable energy options. They can go in for solar in a big way, in case of biomass applications in some places. So it was during the last, I think it was around the end of May or so, that the government of India announced a major package for the revival of the SMEs. It's called the Self-Reliant India movement, where SMEs was a major focus, as I mentioned earlier. So there was a provision for enhancing the overall definition, as I told earlier. A huge package in terms of bankers providing loans at collateral-free loans to the industries, moratorium for more than 1 year. More than millions and millions of MSMEs are going to benefit of that. And we understand that by now already close to half of this package has been utilized by the SMEs in India. Can we go to the next slide? There are many other benefits of similar nature which the government of India has provided. Madam, you referred to, Nilgun referred to the SMEs going in for e-commerce platforms or digital platforms. Yes, these were also, you can see from the first two bullets which I have on this slide, these two were also very clearly identified as options where government of India is providing them those packages for the SMEs to move to these e-packages, e-platforms. The other major area where the Indian government really focused was to really help the SMEs during this period to support in the COVID related areas. Pharmaceutical sector has been one big sector which India is dependent upon, and there were shortages related to PPE kits, masks, ventilators, and government of India really provided a huge impetus to get the SMEs moving in this direction. So even now also they have come out with schemes which are called the performance linked incentive schemes for SMEs to start manufacturing these what India is really dependent upon, for example, on China for many of these active pharmaceutical ingredients, and these got impacted during the lockdown period. So incentives are being provided for industry to move to new products during the unlockdown phase or the present phase. You can go to the next one, please. Yeah, so as I mentioned, one can see some early signs of recovery now that we are in the month of November in India. And one can see the early numbers are clearly showing that there is some kind of a V-shaped recovery happening. Overall, at an economy level, the goods and service tax collections are almost at the pre-COVID levels. And the electricity demand overall, if we look at it, coming with the energy background, or the demand of oil in terms of gasoline and diesel is almost back to the pre-COVID levels of January and February. The two sectors I would just like to touch here where they are playing a key role in terms of the recovery are the automobile sector and the pharmaceutical sector. In the automobile sector, we are seeing a clear, robust growth now in the last 2 months or so. At this time, we have a festive season in India, and many of the industries are back in full stream now. But there is, during this period of the lockdown, Government of India also announced a major initiative on e-mobility. So many of the companies are moving towards e-mobility. There are various policy measures which have been announced for boosting the demand of these new products which are coming up, whether it is in terms of providing subsidies for setting up charging stations, removal of the road tax for a few years for various companies in various states are coming up. Similarly, as I mentioned, in case of the pharmaceutical and medical devices sector, during this short period, just to give an example, India has become the second largest manufacturer of PPE kits, and they are now actually exporting that. Whereas during the early period, there were hardly any manufacturers of these PPE kits, for example. Similarly, for diagnostic kits and many other similar areas. I'll just go to the last slide just to touch on another aspect which was mentioned in the background discussion paper. Can you go to the last slide? Next slide. Yeah, I just thought of also touching on this subject of electrification. So as this probably holds true not just for India, but I think across all the SMEs, across the industry sector, we have seen that normally the focus is always on electricity use. But in many of the SMEs, they use heat in a big way. And there are many opportunities for moving towards electrification of heat. We did a recent study in Terry where we tried to identify a few SME sectors where they are presently using fossil fuel-based options, for example, coal or oil, for example, in foundries, aluminium extraction, tea processing, and even material handling areas, for example, the forklifts in warehouses or everywhere. So they're all diesel operated. There are options now where electricity can be used as the electricity is getting more and more cleaner. India has an ambitious RE program where we are talking about more than 450 gigawatts of electricity coming from renewable energy sources by 2030. So it would augur well for SMEs to start moving towards options which are commercially available for electricity. For example, moving to induction-based furnaces or electrical heating options. So these is something which can actually be done not just in India. I think across the world there are many options for moving towards greener technologies. This is the last slide which I have. I hope to contribute. I hope this was useful as a background discussion. Back to you, madam.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you so much for this very interesting reflection on the Indian case. So now that we have our sitting presentation, it's time to go to our breakout room discussions. So you click on the button to your left that says the series, and to our speakers, you know which room you are located in. To our participants, feel free to walk virtually around our different breakout rooms and select the one that you're most interested in. I wish you all very interesting discussions. Thank you once again for joining.
Maybe we can start while Raul joins us in a bit, but let me introduce myself. I'm Tariq Mtaira, the Director of the Department of Energy at UNIDO, and welcome to this panel discussion on global perspectives related to the overall theme on the integration of sustainable energy enable SMEs in the post-COVID-19 recovery. I see now Raul also joining us. Raul, welcome. So, this is our second conversation within the Vienna Energy Forum Virtual Series on sustainable energy and industry. Last month, we had a conversation that looked broadly on framing the issue within the broader linkages between energy transition and industry transition. And the topic was broadly looking at both energy-intensive industries and SMEs. Today, we wanted to zoom in particularly on the challenges that are facing small and medium enterprises, given that, as mentioned in the introduction, they are the backbone of most industrial activities in developing and emerging economies, sometimes making up 90% of the industrial sector in many of these countries, as we also noted in India. And then we've been sort of also discussing sort of what is the value proposition that we can give to government and policymakers on possibilities of making these linkages between green recovery and the role that SMEs can play in this through perhaps the integration of sustainable energy options, being both renewable energy and both renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in this panel, we want to bring a bit of a global perspective, and I know that I'm aware of the time. We have about 45 minutes for our discussion. So let me just introduce the panel, and then I will probably start with a quick sort of or a general perspective that you can provide from the vantage point where you stand. So joining us in this, as I said earlier, Rana Hadid from the REN 21 from Paris, I trust, Christoph Brunner from the AEE INTEC, which is basically the Institute for Sustainable Technologies here in Austria. Takahiro Oki from the International Energy Agency, Trust, joining us from Paris. Bethany Spears from the US Federal Labs for Renewable Energy Research and Development, joining us from, I don't know which city, the US?
Denver.
Denver, okay, beautiful place. And Raul Miranda from the International Renewable Energy Agency. I trust you're based in Bonn or Abu Dhabi?
Bonn.
Bonn. Okay. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So let me start with a question to all the panelists, and maybe we can sort of zoom a little bit more nuances, because I would like to get your perspective reflecting on the presentation from on the case of India, we've seen the potential recovery package that India has put forward for the SME or small and medium enterprise sectors. I mean, I still find it quite a challenge from a policy point of view. What the government can do precisely to link that recovery package in a more nuanced way with probably an integration of a broader direction toward low carbon recovery pathways through stimulating investment in renewable energy or energy efficiency. So you might sort of think from the vantage point of view of your respective organizational perspective on this, share some of your thoughts on this. So at least, again, to bring it back, we're always trying to see what is the in precise things we can tell governments to do on these linkages. So may I just invite Pitani here to start, and then we can go around from there.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yeah, so I think there's, a few key options that come to mind immediately. I think as we heard from Girish, financing is really a challenge for SMEs. Just in general, to be able to access, capital to operate their businesses. There are, I think, a number of proven models for financing renewable energy. And I think one of the challenges that I've seen in several markets is just, and I'm not speaking to India specifically, but just more broadly, is a lack of clarity in the enabling environment in regards to third-party finance for on-site renewable energy. So I think that is one key area. That's sort of, it's not really, it's not a fiscal measure, but I think just making it really clear and perhaps, adding this option for, on-site power purchase agreements or solar leases that can really, address the upfront cost of these measures and enable the SMEs to be able to pay for this power in a way that is, somewhat similar to how they're paying for energy from a utility as they go. So that's one important measure. I think, some other measures that could be interesting are like green banks or sort of extending green financing products from national development banks, that provide kind of low cost or longer tenor loans. And then on the energy efficiency side, I think there's, some opportunities such as like cash for clunker programs that can help take in kind of really inefficient, transport or equipment and appliances and take those technologies off the market and provide some rebates or grants back to those SMEs to be able to replace those technologies with more efficient options. And I think, just generally there needs to be kind of a mix of a focus on near-term opportunities that provide sort of immediate cost savings that help SMEs just sort of generally have better, operating cash flows, but then also longer-term options as well in terms of how can we support SMEs in the innovation space.
Thank you, Bethany. I think you pointed out quite an interesting program. I was familiar with some of these measures, particularly in the U.S. market, like cash for replacement programs or rebates for obsolete technologies. And that's, I think, where also SMEs have a lot of opportunities to do so, in the sense that they are operating with, let's say, second generation or third generation technologies. Let's move to Raul, and from the perspective of the Irina, what do you see are the policy options? And again, I would like to bring it back to the perspective of small and medium enterprises. I know that Irina has done and just released also a very interesting report just yesterday on the financing of renewable energy, the status of financing. But if we bring it back to this particular sector and its challenges, what do you see from the perspective of Irina?
Okay, so first of all, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me clear. So, okay, first of all, thank you to UNIDO and VEF Virtual Series co-organizers for this invitation. So maybe to start, I think it's worth mentioning, of course, this is quite obvious and also said as in the plenary, but SMEs comprise a large part of sectors supply chain. So these are the bricks behind large companies and are essential all the way to the final delivery of a product. So this means that without having them on board in terms of climate efforts, it may be quite difficult or even impossible to achieve some climate targets and net zero emissions. But of course, it's also not straightforward to assist all SMEs with the same, let's say, strategy, given their highly specialized product or activity. So they are quite different from each other. So when we talk about, for instance, about decarbonization solutions in industries such as steel or chemicals, we talk about, of course, about green hydrogen. We talk about green hydrogen-based feedstocks or possibly bioenergy. And we have been doing a number of studies on that. But when we go to SMEs, we are basically speaking about energy efficiency, renewable power, and electrification of some end users, since anything beyond that would require to go deeper on the specific business case. And for the same reason, it's also quite challenging to understand what makes an SME to adopt a specific challenge. So I would say that it's quite important that these actors are aware of the net benefits as a result of an efficiency measure, for instance, or by procuring renewable power. And from the policymakers' point of view, to understand what are the barriers and opportunities. For instance, expensive power costs may comprise a relevant share of an SME total cost. So in many cases, for instance, this could be a good place to start. So of course, as also just mentioned by NRL, some source of financial support is naturally important, especially during the pandemic situation, since investing in solutions of higher initial cost that likely would also have a higher impact in terms of sustainability, in terms of decarbonization, may be challenging in the coming years. But another point that to be made in this regard is that such support is not only needed for the adoption of a new solution, but also because many of these SMEs are, again, the bulk of global supply chains and of very important industries for the decarbonization. So I think it will be quite crucial that these SMEs stay, to the extent possible, economically healthy, so the entire industry can quickly accelerate their activities when demand starts growing again towards decarbonization. So such investments can be part, of course, of recovery package to SMEs whose products and services are important for sectors such as renewable energy, green hydrogen, and to develop other innovative technologies and solutions. An example of that could be using, for instance, revenues from carbon price systems to support SMEs that comply, let's say, with some requirements on innovation and sustainability. As seen already in some European countries, there are some activities, similar activities already in place. And governments, I think they can in turn track back policy outcomes by setting indicators and targets, for instance, for the number of SMEs introducing innovations over a region or a country, similar to what has been done with also with efficiency measures, and last, to have access to relevant information and help through platforms like the SME Climate Hub, and by which an SME can be also recognized for its efforts by the Race to Zero campaign, and very last, also released to what I think is also quite important, that is to assess the entire life cycle of a given product to be evaluated in terms of sustainability in a way that companies selling the finished product also has some sort of influence or responsibility for the SMEs that are part of their value chain, and this may be also a way to avoid the risk of carbon leakage, for instance.
Thank you, Raul, and I think you touched also on a very important linkages between the role of SMEs in the global value chains of actually renewable energy technologies and solutions as a sector itself, and the impacts, and maybe we can come back to this to see, to explore at least the impact. I want to move to Christoph Brunner and your take on this, and what perhaps you can bring from the perspective of Austria experience or your own.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Tarek. And yeah, of course, also thank you for the invitation, the possibility to contribute to this discussion. I just want to, I think we are, let's say, compared to all the other companies here in this room, quite a small non-university research organization. And we are focusing on research, and we are also focusing on thermal energy. I think this is quite important. This is what I want to take up, also especially what Raul mentioned before. I totally agree. Hydrogen, ammonia, future energy vectors for large industries like steel industry, cement industry, because they need higher temperatures in the production lines in total for the production. But nevertheless, I think we have to be careful, and I refer also to the presentation before about India, that electrification is not, let's say, this total solution, the end solution for everything, to reduce CO2 emission. Why? Because on the one hand, we in Austria, we developed, or we were part of a study where we identified that to cover, let's say, 100% of the energy demand of industry by electricity, we will need all renewable sources which are available in Austria just to cover the energy demand for the industry. And then we have no electricity for households, no electricity for cars, etc., etc. And everybody is demanding this source. So I think here we really have to be careful. And I think energy efficiency as a third fuel, of course, but then additional thermal technologies like solar thermal energy, like heat pumps, like geothermal energy. These are sources, and biomass, biogas, of course. These are renewable energy sources which really we have to still apply also for SMEs. And it really makes sense not to following, from my point of view, this wrong path to electrification for all of the production processes in the industry. I also think that that best practice examples are very important. I think this has been mentioned, but we also have to be careful here that not best practice examples in large industries, energy-intensive industries like steel industry, cement industry, will not help SMEs to following up. Best practice example has the biggest impact if they are in the same sector, industrial sector, if they are in this more or less same geographical region, and also if really a good possibility to following up to implement the same technology, to implement similar solutions here. So I think this we also have to be careful when we are saying we need best practice examples, that they have to come from similar industry sectors, similar geographic regions, etc. And last point, what I want to mention in this first round, regarding investments, I totally agree. I think investments are important. We have to focus on these investments, but there's a lot of money available, but only for really large investments. So if I have this example for this European Investment Fund, which is focusing on high investments, a lot of million euros best, and want to have large investments for industries, for example, large industries, or also energy suppliers, for example. And for small and medium-sized enterprises, we need other models to combine smaller investments to a large investment. Then it's again more attractive for banks, for example, or other institutions really want to invest in bigger areas. But you will never find an investment with, let's say, 10 million euros just for one SMEs, which is not relevant for them. So I think here there's a big need to think about which kind of models, investment models, could be applied here in order to increase these investments for SMEs.
Thank you, Christopher, and I think you brought quite a very important nuances to the discussion on electrification and the need to be a bit more careful in terms of a policy option to push electrification on SMEs and look at that broader set of technologies, including thermal technologies as a venue. And I concur with also the point that you raised to be careful also with generalizing best practices out of the context or industry experience. These are very important caveats, at least from a policy making point of view. Let me move to Rana, and you are on the sort of a global overview of the trends, the broad trends around renewable energy policies and investments and data and jobs. Maybe have you seen any changes in the dynamics of these mega trends relative to in the last few years? And do you see any attention being paid on the integration of renewables in terms of say the COVID-19 recovery measures?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tarek, and thanks a lot for the invitation. Happy to be part of the discussion again. Maybe before answering your question, Tarek, I think it's really important to build also on what the speakers before me have said, to reposition the discussion. And I do think we are looking very much on the renewable energy technology supply side, but when I'm listening to what Christoph said, we're speaking about the demand also, and this is very often where the SMEs are located, and where we also need to look at the full value chain from the energy production to the energy consumption. And here we'll see that even if we speak about steel and cement, etc., this is one industry sector, but the SMEs, especially in the global south, are very often much more local, much more smaller, might have low temperature heat demands. We're talking about other types of SMEs who also need to engage basically in the solution. And building on this, I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that these players can often not do the shift themselves and need policy support, need fiscal measures with regard to this, but they also need a lot of access to information, knowledge, awareness. And I think this is basically where it is extremely important. We are especially in the international space, we speak very much about innovation and new tools, etc. And I'm not saying that we should not speak about these things. They are very important, especially for some sectors. The reality is, however, that many solutions exist. It's just not in a way to be deployed. And that is something which needs to be communicated. This is something where basically also policies and governments, whether these are national governments or sub-national governments, have a clear role to play by deciding how they procure, by deciding what solutions they procure, and by creating basically markets with regard to this. And access to finance is obviously very important, how to bundle it at a local way, etc. But there is some much more basic things which we can do and which policymakers need to do. And this is really informing, but also making sure that there is basically the market so that SMEs also engage, whether it is from the demand side or from the supply side. Now, this also brings me back to the analysis of value chains. I think there is the question on the energy, but there is also the question of the value chains on the renewable energy technologies. And I would like to build on what Christoph said. The reality is we're also talking about real added values in terms of socioeconomic benefits, in terms of job creation. And the reality here is that the pure electrification, even though it makes a lot of sense for many areas, is not the only solution and might often not be the best solution in terms of local job creation, building up opportunities for SMEs, etc. So now I'm not speaking about I compare the solution of, let's say, electricity-based cooking versus solar thermal or solar cooking as one aspect. Solar cooking is basically can be built up as local value chains. And this is something where the reality is with regard to this, that we also need in our to develop new KPIs, so to say, performance indicators on what the policy motivation is. And I think this is clearly something where we see globally a shift. It has been accelerated very much by COVID and the economic recovery packages, that the drivers for policies, whether it is renewable policies, whether it is energy demand policies, whether it's industrial policies, are changing. And I feel that this is something which can be accelerated by really thinking about what is the intention of the policies and developing basically KPI frameworks that are broader and also take into account other aspects, which are mainly socioeconomic aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. And I think you brought to life an example that I was familiar with when I was working in Egypt on the issue of low temperature heat and its need for industry and the effort to go for electric heaters versus solar thermal. And obviously the option for solar thermal heat was associated with a cluster creation of manufacturers, assemblers, and jobs much more than the other option. And so it was a point of debate within the Egyptian context for a number of years. Of course, the issue of quality and services was also a pertinent one. Electrification was an easy and plug play versus the other required a slightly more maintenance solution. So you bring a bit more nuances to this conversation, which is very important. Thank you. And let me bring in Takahiro Oki from the International Energy Agency. Sorry, I kept you to the last, but you also have a broad, and I've been following the conversation from the IEA on energy efficiency and the post-COVID recovery. I think you have brought in a lot of knowledge and normative work to inform policymakers in this. So please, what's the intake on this particular segment of the industry?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. And it's my pleasure to be here and to share with you your perspective on this really important question of SMEs in the current context of COVID-19. Maybe starting with the background, IEA is having a series of high-level conversations with many governments, including those in Global South. And one of the key themes that emerged from those conversations is, of course, the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 on smaller businesses, which is the topic of this conversation, and the importance of giving considerations to those in the context of recovery and transition plans. And SMEs are, as all of you know, really vulnerable to the pandemic and prolonged lockdown measures, because they're cash flow sensitive and their business prosperity is really largely dependent on providing products and solutions to larger industry players that are delaying new investments and projects, which creates liquidity stress or solvency concerns for SMEs. And it's, of course, problematic because as we all know that SMEs are quite central to national and local economies. I think our colleagues from TEDI mentioned some figures about how SMEs are important to Indian country, but actually it is true to other countries too, accounting more than half of employment and employment and GDP on average in OECD countries. So and so far, I think many governments have rightly focused on creating immediate liquidity through direct loans, grants, deferral of tax or social security payments, etc. But I think, and we believe the key question remains as to how to align these efforts with government's pressing needs for economic stimulus and job creation while still being on the right path towards clean energy transitions or low carbon industrialization. And I think our policy advice, coming back to your point, Chairman, I think our policy advice to governments, I think need to take into consideration this aspect. And I also fully agree with a colleague from TEDI. I think energy efficiency can provide a really compelling answer to this key question, because energy efficiency creates stimulus and jobs very quickly. Our recent report, Sustainable Recovery, clearly showed governments can really create millions of jobs by aligning economic recovery plans with clean energy goals. And about half of those jobs can come from efficiency investment, because by its nature, efficiency is job intensive, heavily relying on skilled workforces and supply of energy efficient products and services, whether it's for constructing new homes or retrofitting existing offices, upgrading manufacturing facilities, or even installing new production lines in companies. And efficiency also improves business environment for SMEs themselves, as it creates a range of benefits that are so important for SMEs, not only to survive, but also to grow in the current context of global economic and health crisis. For example, it cuts energy bills, save resources, to invest in more profitable activities, improves business productivity and outputs, and reduce risks, and enhance competitiveness and resilience. And greater efficiency itself, of course, creates new business opportunities for SMEs themselves as suppliers of energy efficient products and services. And maybe getting down to more specific points, I think there are, I think our colleagues mentioned, I think policy responses to SMEs need to be different from those that look at large companies. Because a number of reasons, the lack of information or technical skills, awareness problem, or difficulty in accessing finance. But there are a couple of cross-cutting approaches. I think this is mentioned by colleagues from TEDI. One example is motor replacement. That's one of the best examples. I mean, most industries use motors in their business operations. They tend to be inefficient. And policies like MEPS can help eliminate efficient motors from the market, and the rebate and cash for replacement of industrial motors are particularly important for SMEs given their limited resources. Education is also important to locking in higher levels of efficiency in motors, as SMEs tend to buy a cheaper motor, even if it will cost more to run over its lifetime. And of course, digitalization is providing new opportunities, making efficiency options cheaper and accessible, for example, on their phones. So maybe I'll stop here my intervention.
Thank you, Takahiro. I think you also, thank you for the contribution to this and highlighting also the role that energy efficiency can play, and especially in terms of balancing, of course, the pressure on policymakers from a public policy point of view to stimulate demand and growth in the economy and job creations and link it with of course the opportunities that can come from energy efficiency. Let me, and I think again, aware the time, I know that we still have 10 minutes, but there's a lot of questions, and I think that we can always take this conversation to all kind of directions. I know I have another question from the organizers related to where we have seen examples of subsectors among the SMEs that have been most effective in responding to the impact of COVID-19. I think the example from India, where with the case study on India, they highlighted, of course, the recovery on the auto manufacturing sector, but also the potential for e-mobility. I want to put that question in the background for you to think about, and if there's a question, but I want to also pose an additional question, because looking back and in terms of the 2008 financial crisis, and I remember there's a lot of discussion and reference to the Green Deal that was introduced in the US, and perhaps there was a bit of discussion and evaluations were pointing out to certain success factors in terms of on the job markets. And maybe if I push the mic in the direction of Bethany to see if there is any lesson to draw from that experience to make this successful in terms of tackling sort of the job creation side. If you can recall or bring any nuances from that experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of the programs that were implemented in the U.S. at the federal level focused on kind of large companies, large manufacturers, and incentives that supported large companies. But then there were grants that went to state and local governments that gave some flexibility as to how programs were implemented locally. So I think for us, at least for larger markets or larger countries, that also have states involved or strong provincial governments, I think it's really important to see how federal governments can work with local authorities to really create incentives or programs that are structured at that level. Because I think, as we're seeing, there's clusters of SMEs. And I think, just given the size of the companies, it's really important to have kind of local authorities that can do that outreach to really engage SMEs in programs. I think it's not enough just to, offer a financing program, but especially as kind of Raina was pointing to, like there's a lot of knowledge sharing and sort of demand for programs that needs to be created. So we really need to be reaching out to the SMEs to get them actively involved in programs.
Thank you. No, I mean, very, very much important, and creating the demand for these programs and for these incentives among SMEs was key. And I also familiar with one evaluation where skills and training was needed to kind of follow in parallel to create the value chains of the services around energy efficiency and renewable energy. So that's a point to note. So coming back to the question, I'm leaving it open and inviting anyone to jump into the conversation on the sort of where do we see examples of subsectors where we see, of course, where SMEs could respond effectively in this kind of situation, and also if you want to also comment or come into the other our discussion that we have had so far. So please let me, I'm not gonna, but.
We'd just like to bring in a figure which I find is mind-blowing, so to say, analysis from IISD et al. On the analysis of the economic recovery packages in the G20 countries. And I think energy represents just a couple of % of the economic recovery packages. And of these, over 50% go to fossil fuel. And I just think like we can go back to the financial crisis of the past, but we really need to have a readjustment also of where the money goes in the economic recovery packages in the current state. And I think this is something where it is very important, as you said, and we are not really specifically analyzing SMEs from rent-to-non side, so I'm not the right person to bring in good examples, but I feel in this discussion about how to really orient the economic recovery packages, what policies to put in place, and reorient towards efficiency and renewable energy. This is a discussion which should be linked to the SME discussion, because ultimately these economic recovery packages need to create local jobs. And especially we're talking here about the global south, we're talking about very often the SMEs are part of a very informal sector. So this clearly also requires a certain move of such informal players into something which is a framework where we can clearly define targets, plans, awareness raising programs, etc., to create opportunities.
Maybe if I can hop in here and follow up what Rana said, I think there's a need of, let's say, to ensure that the investment goes in this right direction. And if you invest in new technologies, there's always a risk. And the question is then, who is taking over this risk? And it can't be that the end user only is taking over this risk. End user, I mean now the industry or the SME, that they are taking over fully the risk of new technologies which are applied. And for this, I think we have to develop a guarantee concept where, on the one hand, this risk is partly taken over also from the government. So it's maybe a share, partly from the SME, partly from the investor, and partly from the government. This would also enable that more banks, for example, investors are willing to do this investment because the risk is lower. And also, of course, then the SMEs will invest in renewable energies, energy efficiency technologies, because there's a minimized risk on that. And for the government, this so-called maybe climate guarantees, what they take over, is then, of course, again, a profit, because more investment is performed, and also revenues are coming back to the government itself. So I think it's for sure a win situation for the government again. But what this needs here is, besides, let's say, this investment methodology or a concept, also, let's say, a very detailed and good technological assessment of these investments. So it really needs to follow up standards, that you are sure that these investments are reliable, that they are fit quite well in a production line, and following, let's say, overall rules, that let's say there are no wrong investments in some directions. And I think to following up, on the one hand, to have this quality on the technical part, and then to have these climate guarantees, which are partly taken over from the governments, I think this could be for sure a push for investments, even for companies or the SMEs which don't have, let's say, these big possibilities for higher investments.
Maybe if I can add a point on that, so I'm not sure if I have an example of SMEs, specific SMEs being effective, but I think a point is that collaboration is key. So I think the reason around some SMEs maybe are doing well during the pandemic has to do also, as mentioned, I think also in the plenary, and also as also just mentioned, by the industries that these SMEs are part of, as along the value chain. And of course, those providing also products, let's say, for companies from different sectors, have been even more effective on that, or in the sense that, of course, diversification is also a key. So maybe, for instance, going back to the green hydrogen sector, that has continuous pacing up its development in respective of the pandemic, since the sector has been central or has been deemed central in different recovery package and decarbonization strategies. And also specifically in this sector, given there is a strong urge for the scale up of the industry, that would also lead to the reduction of costs that are needed and etc. SMEs have been a fundamental part of setting strategies and for coming up with specific designs that can bring economies of scales, for instance, for green hydrogen facilities, that while these projects increase in numbers and also in terms of installed capacity. So for instance, related to that, a format that has been carried out by some countries has been the creation of some sort of industrial hubs, where we would have at the same place both, let's say, the hydrogen producer and the consumer. So, for instance, a green hydrogen facility and a steel manufacturer planning to use green hydrogen to replace coke and steel making, for instance. And similarly, including SMEs in these, let's say, hydrogen or industrial hubs environments could help building capabilities and collaborations across the local supply chain, and would also make the product of those specific SMEs quite unique, and that would in turn maximize economic benefits. And of course, all of these could be good examples for the global South.
Thank you all for bringing this as an example, and also potentially, I mean, I'm aware, yeah, that the hydrogen has benefited a lot from the recovery package, at least in the European context, and the Green Deal. So this could present also an example. Mindful of the time we have, we have 5 minutes.
Maybe I'll also jump in.
So let me give the floor to Takahiro to jump in 1 minute, and probably Rana 1 minute, and then we can wrap up in 2.
Yeah, actually, my point, get back to Rana's point about economic recovery and learning from the past experience to make it more green. And I fully agree, and our institution fully agree. And we see really from the governments across the world that they are really recognizing the importance of aligning these economic recovery efforts with clean goals, but they are wondering how to do it. And that's where we can, I think, put inputs about the way to design and implement programs. And when it comes to efficiency, recently, and the Global Commission for Urgent Action on Energy Efficiency made 10 key recommendations for governments across the world on how to accelerate efficiency through stronger policy actions, really clarifying how to design and implement policies. And it's got a really lots of best examples from across the world. And this has kind of really key learnings for policymakers when they're interested in aligning their efforts to green pathway. And one example is that they really think it's important to set a suite of policies combining incentives, finance, regulations, or educations, and everything else that are important, which kind of resonate with, I think, the point raised by Christoph. It's important to get finance flowing to SMEs. Having finance itself is not sufficient, but it's a combination of it that really create the awareness of efficiency opportunities with compelling narratives for a single or a few individuals who oversight the management of SMEs, and help them build capacity and expertise to identify opportunities and implement energy management practices through providing the range of training programs, and also incentivize SMEs to implement those measures by expanding existing public funding schemes for those SMEs and leveraging additional private investment. Sometimes all we know, they are having difficulties accessing finance because sometimes finance institutions don't have suitable financial products for SMEs. So that's also essential to take into consideration.
Thank you. Okay, I got the message that we need really to revert back to the plenary. Rana, a few words, your last words, and my to summarize.
And I think here I really like that you brought the efficiency topic up. I think there is a need for a much more systemic approach, and this means an integration of efficiency and renewables. It means supply and demand. When I take the part of the industrial hubs or zoning or in cities of districts, I think there is a zoning approach here. And just as one really interesting example to bring in is the case of Chile, where basically the move to an efficient and renewable-based energy system is very consciously used for attracting industrial and business players. And by attracting large ones, you create SME opportunities.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. I have the difficult task to synthesize few statements. I hope that you trust me in at least conveying some of the key messages that you shared with us. Of course, we will have another summary, but given the time, I think we need to go back to the plenary and convene there. So thank you so much. Thank you also for all joining us on behalf of UNIDO and for supporting this conversation. Let's meet in the plenary and we take it from there. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the Country Voices discussion. The objective for this breakout group is really to hear country perspective in the context of recovery and COVID-19. So I will ask you to briefly introduce yourself before starting answering the first question. So the first question is, given the different country context and capabilities, how can sustainable energy industry integration enable SMEs to contribute to COVID-19 recovery and low carbon industrialization? So if you don't mind, Alfred, I would like to start with you. If you could briefly introduce yourself and provide your perspective regarding the first question.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm Alf Hartzenberg from the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSR in South Africa. Before I answer and get into the question more directly, I'd like to sketch some context in terms of SMEs in South Africa. SMEs in South Africa represent more than 98% of businesses and employ between 50 to 60% of the country's workforce across all sectors, and are responsible for about a quarter of job growth in the private sector. So there's no doubt that this sector is a critical engine of the economy. During times of crisis, sadly, however, they are often the least resilient because typically they have limited cash reserves, smaller client bases, and unfortunately, less capacity to manage commercial pressures than their larger counterparts do. In South Africa, SMEs already had to contend, prior to COVID, had to contend with a contracting economy. And lockdown measures just further served to accelerate the downward spiral of revenues. Currently, in South Africa, analysts are predicting that around 60% of SMEs may close before the end of this crisis. And that's quite phenomenal. Because of their critical role in job creation and growth, protecting and enabling SMEs during this period is very important, especially since their survival is a lead indicator for the economy as a whole. SMEs essentially are the lifeblood of the economy and sadly also the most at risk. So sectors that were worst affected, other than manufacturing, also included the services sector, in particular tourism, hospitality, and retail. And while these are some of the fastest growing SME sectors in the country, the majority of business in these sectors were unable to operate during an extended and very hard lockdown in South Africa. In addition to taking steps to innovate and pivot their businesses in response to this new reality, the vast majority of SMEs are going to need broader support if they're going to emerge stronger at the end of this crisis, because many of them lack the skill to restructure their businesses. There's no doubt, and we're starting to see the early signs of this, that digital technology will be the medium that aids rapid and smart recovery. And South Africa's economy hinges on companies, particularly small and medium enterprises as engines of job creation, using the best technology levers, the digital tools, and solutions to enhance competitiveness and to ensure their survival. SMEs are particularly vulnerable to the digital divide compared to the larger corporates who have big IT departments at their disposal to build technological capacity. There has, however, been a rapid increase in SMEs focusing on renewable energy, an influx of large-scale energy project developers from many parts of the world into South Africa, followed by a range of local and overseas investors keen to shape a new investment frontier in our country, and not to mention the construction of the country's first large-scale commercially driven renewable energy projects have seen SMEs really starting to play a more significant role and a contributory role in that regard. So the South African government has identified the green economy as one of 12 job drivers that could help contribute to creating 5 million additional jobs by 2021. The new growth path envisages that as many as 300,000 new direct jobs could be created in the areas of natural resource management and renewable energy construction. So from that perspective, and just to wind up on the context that I've shared, we believe, especially from our perspective in South Africa, that government should provide funding support through grants and low or no interest loans to SMEs working in low carbon technologies in the clean energy sector to facilitate and to stimulate the green economic recovery that we're all looking for. Compensation should be provided to SMEs to increase incremental cost through reduction in energy taxes, for example, or tax rates on sustainable investments in the circular economy, renewable energy, or even energy efficiency projects. So governments could establish a specialized clean energy financial institution to enable SMEs as a driving force to clean and green economic recovery in our country. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Alfred, for these insights from South Africa. Shuva, shall we continue with you? If you could briefly introduce yourself and please give us your take on the how can sustainable energy industry integration help SMEs towards recovery after COVID-19?
Good evening over here. I think it's afternoon for some of our colleagues over here. So good evening, my name is Shubha. I head new initiatives at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And our focus over the last 10 years has been on the energy efficiency and sustainability side. But this year, especially, in fact, from before the coronavirus, we started realizing the need to relook at the MSME sector on why this was not effective, the measures that we were taking so far to green them, because it was happening in pockets, it was not happening for the most of them. And Mr. Sethi has actually given a very nice background, so I'm going to just kind of get into the problems that we're facing or the challenges that are there, and then maybe we can look at the answers too. So one of the biggest problems that we have with MSMEs, as we call them, as Mr. Sethi said, in India, is that the informality. So even though there are 64 million of them almost, we don't really have a database or any sort of centralized system we don't know who they are, where they are, what are they doing, what is their priority, what is their status financial, how many people do they have, what are their business models, are they working around the year? We don't have any such information. So earlier this year in July, the government started a national database after COVID. They had some piecemeal things going on before that, but nothing effective. And this was started in July, called Udyam, which is now based on self-registration, linking what we call the Aadhaar profile. It's the unique ID that citizens and companies have in India, with tax databases, so your PAN, your income tax, or your GST, goods and services registration, etc., to bring some of these MSMEs onto the formal platform. And we believe that this is a platform that can eventually grow to give this value-added services like measuring energy efficiency or measuring the profitability yielded from that and so on. But right now, in the last 4 months, only around 700,000 of our 63 million MSMEs have signed up on this. So you can look at the scale of the problem that we have over here. The other major problem that we have is the financing issue, which Mr. Sethi also touched upon, or a lack of credit worthiness. Because we don't know who they are, they don't have access to any formal banking channels, they don't have access to ethical investments. I mean, because the money exists, but we are not able to connect them to the MSMEs because they don't have any backing or risk management or financial debt payment systems to really make them an organized sector. So 96% of our MSMEs are proprietary, and around 90% of them are informal. So, what do you do with this? That's the second problem. The third problem is they don't have risk mitigation of operations. So, like Mr. Sethi said, that we have them in clusters in many places. So the entire clusters are vulnerable, whether homogeneous or heterogeneous, to climate risk, to tail end risk, to things like COVID. So when something happens locally, like let's say flood, everything is wiped out over there. So your energy efficiency is fairly long back in the set of priorities that we have to address before we get to that. And so what we have done, and also we have another huge problem with the federal structure. So because we have the central government making certain rules which don't apply to the states, or the states don't think it's convenient for them, so they don't take up. Energy efficiency, clean energy, these are mainly central government oriented schemes where we have made national commitments or NDCs and such. And not all states adopt these things within their framework. So between two states, we'll have a huge disparity in how the companies are operating in terms of what are their compliances, what are their regulations, where they're getting the money from, do they have access to renewable energy. Some states are very progressive, some states are decidedly against this. So there's no homogenization across the nation in that sense. And also, there are certain external threats in the sense that a lot of our MSMEs are dependent on their client organizations, that the parent organizations, a large part of which is the public sector, which is not very sensitive to energy efficiency or sustainability goals. They're becoming, but they traditionally haven't been. So their payment income, their future, I would say, depends on these larger companies doing things. So a lot of the greening effects have been part of the big companies greening their value chains, and not the energy efficiency prerogatives of the companies themselves. So we have done a study in 2018 specifically on this, where we have seen that MSMEs that are competing with the large companies are 3 times more inclined to invest in energy efficiency audits, and 3.5 more times inclined to actually invest in energy efficiency technologies. So unless they feel a threat, there is no motivation to improve this facility, though we have found, as Mr. Sethi said, that around 15 to 25% of their energy consumption is linked directly to productivity or the profit margins of the organization, but they are not seeing that value yet. And also we have seen that if an MSME actually takes measure to do a formal energy efficiency audit, investors should become 6 times more interested in investing in this company. So on both sides, there is a desire to move towards that, but we have this certain other problems, not related directly to their sustainability interest. They don't know how to do, they don't know where to do, they don't have the money, they don't have the know-how, they don't have skilled workers to implement it, they don't have any regulations mandating them to do it beyond a certain point, and they don't know how to link it to their profitability margin. So these are the challenges that we are currently working with, and energy efficiency. As a nation, we are a frugal nation. So India in general is very frugal about the energy that we use, the resources that we use. So we're not a nation that's really profligate about any of our resources. So it's something that I think with the right awareness and the right regulations and the right formalization, we'll be able to achieve either very quickly or not at all. So it's something that's sort of, like a big basket of people will either come on board or otherwise it's going to fail as a concept.
Great. Well, thank you for your insights. I think it's very useful to understand the challenges that India is facing. Indeed, we heard from Girish in his presentation at the plenary that India was the second country hit hardest by COVID-19 cases. So very, very helpful and very insightful thoughts that you have shared with us. Thank you for this. Chris, over to you with your opinion and your views on how can energy industry integration help SMEs towards COVID-19 recovery.
Sure. Well, thank you very much to UNIDO and all the others involved in organising the Vienna Energy Forum. It's great to be here today. So I'm representing the Carbon Trust Beijing office today. My colleagues in China sadly couldn't join, so they've provided me with some information to share with you all. So this is some high-level views on the situation in China. So my role is I'm the Asia director. So while I'm based in the UK, I work very closely with our team in China to deliver a range of projects related to China's low carbon transition, including some work that we co-delivered with UNIDO as part of the VEF-funded Industrial Energy Accelerator. So to begin with, I'd like to talk a bit about the broader climate change policy context in China. As you'll all be aware, President Xi's commitment for China to become carbon neutral by 2060 provides very strong political commitment to accelerate decarbonization and would further strengthen China's sustainable energy industry. This announcement builds on the previous policy documents, such as the 2020 energy work guidance that was issued by the National Energy Administration. They also highlighted the really important role of China's sustainable energy industry in the green recovery. However, there remain a lot of questions still about China's short and medium-term plans, and so all eyes are on the 14th five-year plan, which is currently under development, to really understand to what extent the green recovery is embedded in this plan. Some initial analysis of China's post-COVID stimulus carried out before President Xi's announcement demonstrates that or suggests there's continued investment in some carbon-intensive industries. So the 14th five-year plan presents an opportunity to really embed the clean energy transition at the heart of China's recovery and to bring about some of the structural changes that are needed to ensure the economic recovery is not associated with the unsustainable rebound in carbon dioxide emissions and local air pollution. So within that context, what are the opportunities for the sustainable energy and industry integration to contribute to COVID-19 recovery and low carbon industrialization, especially for SMEs? Well, I'm going to focus in particular on some of the opportunities within that growing renewable energy sector and in the increased efforts now to improve energy efficiency across the country. During COVID-19, the shortfall of energy demand generated an oversupply of available power capacity. As that crisis hit, it meant that grid operators sought the cheapest supply source to balance the lower demand. And therefore, the weaker electricity demand increased the share of renewables in the system, while sending some of the more polluting and costly carbon fuels to the back of the queue. In this sense, it's a really positive new view that COVID has hastened the end of the fossil fuel energy in the power sector and opened up a whole new opportunities for the sustainable energy industry in China. At the recent Carbon Trust Corporate Sustainability Summit, we had the pleasure of Mr. Lei Zhang, the CEO of the Envision Group, giving a keynote speech. For those that don't know, Envision is a company that began operations in Shanghai in 2009 and has now grown into one of the world's leading green tech companies. And so Mr. Zhang, he believes that China will actually achieve its carbon neutral goal before 2050, and that this will largely be driven by further technological advancements, especially related to wind, solar, battery storage, hydrogen, and especially the Internet of Things that can provide solutions to support connectivity and balancing. And so there's enormous potential for Chinese SMEs, just like Envision was 10 years ago, to play a leading role in developing and deploying these new technologies. And recognizing the role that SMEs will play in the country's decarbonisation, the Chinese government has been providing support to SMEs within these sustainable industries. They've been providing additional financial support as part of that post-COVID-19 recovery plan to ensure that they are sustained and able to grow as part of the future decarbonisation. The other opportunity that I'll talk about is for SMEs in the sustainable energy industry is the growth in demand post-COVID-19 from various sectors, in particular looking at electric vehicles, data centers, 5G and telecoms. The growth in the energy demand from these new and emerging sectors, combined with China's decarbonisation plans, will result in higher demand for energy saving and energy efficiency, which often requires technology upgrades. So the Carbon Trust Beijing office, which itself is a Chinese SME, has seen a significant increase in demand for services related to carbon management, carbon footprinting, and target setting. So I'm sure there'll be this increased demand will be reflected across all of China's sustainable energy industry. My last comment is just going back to the work we delivered under the Industrial Energy Accelerator, whereby the Carbon Trust Beijing team was working in support the NDRC to understand the current use of China's existing technology list that was providing guidance to companies on where they could purchase of high-performing green technologies. The list that was in its current state was fairly underused. It wasn't linked to any particular incentives. And so going back to Girish's earlier points around SMEs really needing increased access to renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies and increased increased access to finance, there's really an opportunity to introduce new technology sort of, and financial incentives to really promote, to support SMEs and to address some of the other issues that Shiva mentioned beforehand. And I can talk a bit more detail about the new work the Carbon Trust is doing in China when we move on to the latter part of this session.
Great, thank you so much, Chris, very insightful. Girish, we already heard from you as part of the plenary and as part of your presentation, but is there anything additional that you would wish to add regarding the opportunity that energy industry kind of synergy offers to SMEs when they start to now slowly recover from COVID-19 impacts?
Yeah, thanks for having me here to speak again. I think I have covered quite a few things earlier, and also some of these points were also reflected in terms of basically the challenges by my colleague from India, Shua, when she mentioned about the huge challenges that we face in the SME sector. I intentionally did not refer to the challenges in my opening presentation, but these are the large, huge challenges which we all face. Looking more positively at what can be done during these days when everybody is really faced with this unprecedented challenge. I would just like to spend maybe 1, 2 or 3 minutes, if you allow me, is to really focus on 3 things which actually are really needed, irrespective of whether we are talking about India or I think any other part of the world. I heard the same thing when Alfred talked about South Africa, and now Chris mentioned about China as well. The 3 things which I basically believe are important for the SME sector across all countries would be: the number 1 is the issue of technology, second is finance, and third is the capacity building, skilling. So I think in all these areas, I think what exactly is needed in any of the schemes or the programs which anybody has to introduce, irrespective of whether it has to be the national governments or the state governments or by the international bodies like UNIDO or World Bank or anybody who wants to really work with this huge sector, which is the most important sector in terms of not just energy efficiency and RE, but also in terms of all the SDGs which we really talk about. So when it comes to the technology, to me, I think the most important thing is that SMEs, as I think Shiva also pointed out, there are mostly small companies, micro companies, proprietorship companies. They're dealing with things which are of day-to-day interest to them: raw materials, labor, finance, those kind of things. They are not really spending too much time on things like energy efficiency or RE, or really scouting for technologies here or doing something separately. To me, I think what is most important would be to design and develop programs, whether it is by, as mentioned, by governments, the national governments, or by the international bodies, to really design programs which would help SMEs implement these options. There are commercially available technologies available. Everybody talks about that. But what exactly is needed is some kind of a hand-holding support. And these should be long drawn-out programs where you provide support to them in clusters. For example, in India, you have all these clusters of where 500 units are existing. So if one is able to spend 4 years, 3 years, 2 years working with some of those SMEs, maybe 15, 20, 100 of them, then others would adopt. So some kind of schemes are needed really on the technology side to really support these SMEs adopting. And these need to be complemented with specific financial schemes. So all these things really require initial finance. We do have these financial mechanisms available in all the banks. For example, in India, in fact, there is a mandatory requirement by the Federal Bank, by the Reserve Bank of India, that X percentage of the finance must go to sectors like SMEs. They are the priority lending sectors, they say. Finance is available. But what we have basically seen is, even during this COVID time, this emergency credit line to MSMEs, which was given during the COVID period, almost 50% of that has been utilized, they say. But the fact remains, the survey was done, it has actually gone for meeting their working capital requirement, operating expenses, not really for any technology upgradation per se. So what exactly would be needed is some customized technology and financing schemes put together, which really help them get into the new investments which are required. There was this total breakdown in terms of the cash flows, in terms of not getting their working capital, how to really restart. So this has actually helped them restart. And the third one, which I really wanted to focus across, I think that also is very important, is the issue of skilling. or reskilling or upskilling, let me call it that way. I think that's something which is extremely important as we really talk about digitization and e-platforms and marketplaces. Many of these people are not really having those skills with them. Although India, as we say, is the IT capital, and we do provide all those workforce for large IT companies in USA or anywhere else. But I think the fact remains that if we really talk about the 64 million SMEs, they are not so literate. So really some kind of basic literacy on these kind of tools. And as we go for automation, as we go for AI, machine learning, things like that, you would need those reskilling courses. I think we do have a fairly large Skill India program. There's a separate Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. But really one needs is more large programs to really support these smaller SMEs in terms of upgrading or upskilling themselves. So I just thought these three things are key, not just for India, but across, I would say, many of we have worked, as Terry, we have worked in many of these neighboring countries, in Southeast Asian countries as well, were not represented in this panel. But if you really look at the backbone of Thailand, you look at Vietnam, Cambodia, all these countries are really, the SMEs are the backbone. 90% plus companies in all these, 90% businesses in all these countries are actually SMEs. And I guess I was reading some before, for the purpose of this seminar, I was just reading some documents. Even in the European Union for developed world, almost it was a figure of 98% of the businesses are actually SMEs, the whole of European Union in terms of numbers. So I think this is an extremely important segment, and maybe large international programs are also needed really to support the revival of these SMEs as they move forward. So these were some of the additional comments from us. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Girish. I think very insightful. So colleagues, I think we heard a lot about challenges. We heard about measures that would be needed. But I think with the next question, what we are interested in are actually success stories. So how are countries addressing the idea of recovery post-19? And are there any success stories where we have seen a certain framework or measures being implemented to help SMEs to recover and to utilize the most from the energy industry synergy? Alfred, over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. You know, listening to Girish, Shuva, and Chris, our worlds aren't very different. I think the challenges that SMEs face in our respective countries are incredibly parallel. But to talk about success stories, I just want to sketch them again, some context and some broad successes, and then maybe two specific ones. In South Africa, currently, more than 50% of the SMEs are currently receiving support from banks and other financial institutions, and more than 60% of SMEs in our country are taking advantage of relief offered by government under COVID-19. So to prevent a widespread contraction of the sector, more will need to be done, however, from both government and the private sector. And they have special roles to play, and I'm going to touch on a few of those. One is to boost the national entrepreneurship ecosystem, in which governments enhance national entrepreneurial culture by promoting programs that prioritize SMEs as preferred supplier, as Girish just mentioned. Second one is to invest in skills and capabilities, as also mentioned by Girish, that SMEs need, and governments can secure that entrepreneurs are supported with the skills, as most would benefit from additional training. Third one is to drive innovation in research and development. Research and development are key requisites for innovation and growth, and successful entrepreneurship ecosystems recognize that. Maybe the final one is to talk of targeted specific sector support for SMEs. And in South Africa, we are blessed with quite a few sector-directed institutions. And here, the government need an opportunity to work with entities like the Small Enterprise Development Agency and the Small Enterprise Finance Agencies to provide nuanced and sector-specific interventions to help SMEs get back on their feet post-crisis. SMEs are a vital engine in South Africa's economy. They drive the growth, they create employment, they spearhead innovation in many respects. SMEs are also the customers of large companies across the supply chain and supply vital goods and services to companies and households, helping to keep the wheels of the economy in motion. Furthermore, as a result of that, SMEs can leverage their agility. They may lack scale, but they have agility. They can leverage that agility to design and incubate new technologies and business models to build a better future. Many of South Africa's SMEs have the potential to become tomorrow's large corporations. And that is clearly being shown. If you look at some of the larger corporations we have today, they were some of the SMEs of yesteryear. What we have seen in South Africa is that many SMEs have adjusted already to the new normal of remote working conditions and social distancing. And I'll share some examples with you. Delaying the non-essential and non-priority projects to some future date is also a way in which some SMEs are managing and mitigating this crisis. So they delay projects in favor of other projects which have a direct and immediate effect on the current and sustenance of their businesses. By remaining active on social media and through blog posts and websites, we are seeing that SMEs are starting to tap into investors and customers, even amidst social distancing norms, keeping them relevant during these times. Another one is that SMEs can provide worldwide training in sustainable energy knowledge dissemination to counter the threat of becoming irrelevant in such difficult times. We are seeing, though, that digital and new technologies create an opportunity for SMEs to enhance their reach and efficiency at lower cost, overcoming the scale disadvantage that they have relative to their larger competitors. SMEs can also focus on key areas, and these are the two specific examples, Katerina, I'd like to share. They can focus on key areas of competitiveness in the value chain, product or operations, and identify best technology levers to enhance competitiveness. For example, a local business processing outsource SME leveraged VPN technology to transfer their systems into a custom-made platform which could quickly be modified as the needs shifted. This allowed them to rapidly move their call centers to remote working in the wake of nationwide lockdown in South Africa. And in less than 5 days, they moved more than 80% of their operations to a remote working model. And the second example, and I want to wrap up with this, is that SME is also focused on operational efficiencies to drive competitiveness and support the sales while creating increased capacities in their respective businesses. And an example here is a manufacturing SME who used basic visualization tools such as management boards to optimize operations. And by tracking tasks in progress and KPI dashboards, they managed to achieve a 25% improvement in scrap reduction. And on top of that, had a resultant revenue increase of 100%. So SMEs that exploit that agility that they have can clearly benefit and get ahead. Thank you very much.
Great. These are great examples. Thank you for sharing that. Shuva, are there any success stories that you could share with us from India?
I mean, our whole thing has been in the last few years, two things have happened. One, the government has very aggressively driven certain mission mode programs. So whether it's Make in India, you have Skill India, you have Digital India to bring in digitalization. You have a new program that our state governments are trying to do. It's called the One District, One Product, where you focus your energies on specialized products in certain areas to create cluster efficiency. For the fifth time since independence in 47, we have now got the Science, Technology and Innovation policy coming in, the STIP. And it's something that we are working on. I don't know if Mr. Sethi is also a part of this. Terry might also be a part of this conversation, where we are formalizing R&D. R&D is something that is completely ignored in India. We don't do it at any level. It's a very nascent field. We have a huge gap between those valleys of technical studies, the commercial studies, and we're very rarely able to bridge that. So R&D has been given like a focus area, the priority sector by the government, and that requires a change in mindset more than any government programs and all. The success stories, the other thing, couple of things we need to do before we get to the success stories. We need to map the vulnerabilities of this. SMEs are taken as a homogeneous bunch of 63 million organizations. They are not. So identify them as sectors, and then you map their vulnerabilities, economic vulnerabilities, the local vulnerabilities. What are the technology needs? You need to identify them, and then you need to fix their problems. The one advantage that we have is that because of very rapid, technological advance, smartphones, apps, our audience, our public has taken very, very quickly to becoming e-savvy. So whether our e-learning, it's something that's picked up very, very fast in the last 6 months. Digital payments have picked up very well. So now we see avenues to transmit information to these people, even regarding sustainability or productivity or whatever, via channels that they are comfortable with. It's in small doses. These are not big tomes for the SMEs. At the same time, we can now set up, support groups for them, like similar SMEs coming together. Government now knows how to provide certain information to them. They know where to go for, relief of any sort. So this interconnectivity, I would say, is our biggest success story. It's not specific to SMEs at this point, but as a nation, we have become very, very quick in accepting and absorbing change, absorbing technology, making the most of that technology. And I think that is where our biggest advantage is going to come from, where the public does not feel disconnected from the development story, even if they're in rural areas, remote areas, small towns. Earlier, we didn't have a lot of ways to reach them. We have that connect right now. Electrification, Mr. Sethi brought it up. In fact, electrification has also been very rapid. It's in an exponential growth in the last 3-4 years. We have the rural electrification program. It has got between 97 and 99% penetration at this point at the household level, at the I would say at the individual establishment level. And this electrification has given them, again, a way of accessing developmental tools, including very, very small appliances, let's say DRE appliances, the distributed renewable energy appliances, which can, help at a very local level, and it completely brings a sea change in which they operate. So DRE becomes a very important tool for us to take several programs on that. We feel that more than grid electricity, circular economies or hybrid economies, which brings in local biomass, which is getting translated, like he said, the heat is not taken seriously, biomass to heat, electrification to heat. These are not things that we have studied from the commercial aspect. These give us many areas to now explore, that how do we bring in local resources to the local person with minimum transmission distribution losses? How do we educate these people that whatever output they have has to be economically viable and not just sustenance oriented, but they can profit from it. That is the second part of this thing. And the third part, I would like to say that something very major happened in September, where we opened up our agriculture sector. So 2 or 3 bills, 3 bills were passed, which has now given our farmers, agriculture is a very regulated sector where they could only sell to government regulated markets. A landmark bill has been passed which allows our farmers to sell to anybody, anywhere. It's a completely open and deregulated market. This bill has been passed. It's going to become an act over the next few. This is going to convert a huge agri sector, which again employs something like the other half of our population who are not in MSMEs. And they again, then agriculture as an economic activity also becomes an SME and an MSME sector, because they become a productivity oriented unit. So how we go forward, it's a massive thing that's not happened in the last 70 years. It's a big move ahead for us. So on one part, you have the industrialized SMEs, and on the other side, you have the agricultural SMEs. So your water nexus, your energy nexus, your sustainability measures, everything gets 2x. Opportunities are massive. And I'm very hopeful. I don't know if Mr. Sethi is very much more experienced than me in this. Maybe he can add to what this agricultural sector opening up really means. Everything then becomes an SME. 90% of our country's productivity will then come from SMEs, and very large companies, become they're the volume leaders in terms of output. But here is a huge bulk of people and companies that need. And I think digitization is the thing that's going to connect all of these people together. Like they're going to feel like one community, and that is where we're going to focus. So
great. Thank you for this 3 important points. Colleagues, we have a little less than 10 minutes, and I would still like to call Chris and Girish to share their success stories. And while they do that, if you have a chance, there is one question from the audience that you could maybe very briefly address, and it's asking what are support instruments that SMEs require to reskill their workforce. So maybe just if you have quick idea to include in your intervention, please do. Chris, now over to you regarding the success stories that you could share maybe from China.
Sure thing. No, thank you, Roland. I really just like to say, first of all, that I really agree with Girish's 3 points around what any programs need to look at the technology, the finance, and the skills. They're fundamental. And if you were to avoid any of those aspects, then you're not going to create a real wholesale change. The program and the success story that I'm keen to talk about in China is very much builds off those 3 areas. The Carbon Trust Beijing team is currently working with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, to introduce the Green Technology Selector tool into China. The GTS is an online shopping platform that connects green technology manufacturers with financial institutions, businesses of all sizes, and homeowners. So this program is not specifically targeted at SMEs, but actually it's a program that we think has got a real value for them. First, let me give a bit of background to this tool, and I'll talk a bit more about sort of what we're trying to do in China and why that actually is going to be really beneficial for SMEs in China in particular. So the Green Technology Selector was first developed by EBRD over the last 5 years, initially with some funding from the Austrian government, and initially for use within its own countries of operation. But there are now more than 26,000 products listed on the GTS, ranging from heat pumps to solar panels to no-till seeding machines. And the EBRD has also launched an app to enable green technology buyers to quickly identify vendors and manufacturers. So there's a real ambition to make the information available on this tool as accessible as possible to groups like SMEs who haven't got the normal capacity or the time to identify the high-performing technology. This Green Technology Selector is now recognized as a world-leading tool that supports financial institutions in emerging economies to de-risk and to scale up their investments in green projects. So financial institutions in over the 25 countries supported by EBRD, including banks, leasing companies, but also microfinance institutes that are more engaged with SMEs, they're now referring to the GTS as a technical eligibility assessment to develop their own green financial products. And this improves access to technologies from the end users, also rapidly increases their ability to implement renewable energy or energy efficiency projects. So how is this tool being introduced to China, and what's the Carbon Trust role? So we have worked on similar programs before in the UK. We've helped design and manage the UK's energy technology list. So we're now collaborating with the EBRD to expand the Green Technology Selector on a global basis, and we're starting with China in the first instance. We see China as one of the world's leading manufacturers of technology, but also the center of a rapidly expanding green finance market. So the Carbon Trust Beijing office is now working with a number of Chinese industry associations to support technology manufacturers to register their companies, their shops, and their products on the GTS. This will promote the export of from China of high-performing green technologies, while also populating the China page of this platform that can be used by local banks, businesses, and homeowners across the world's second largest economy. And so we have a real focus now on ensuring that Chinese financial institutions are using this list and linking it to their credit lines that may be directly targeted at different companies like the SME sector. We believe that the standardized tools like the Green Technology Selector are really central to scaling up green finance globally, and really helpful in giving confidence to small and medium-sized green investment opportunities in emerging markets such as China. But I'm confident that this tool can also be applicable in many other countries too. We're really excited by supporting the expansion of the GTS, and we're keen to use it to promote the international trade of green products and to strengthen the green finance market. We see the opportunity to expand this tool into other countries, and so we're very keen to hear from any other countries or stakeholders who believe that this tool could be useful for introduction to their country too. And so if you'd like to hear anything more about that, please let me know. But it comes back to really the need to have information available around technology, having financial products linked to that, and supporting and providing broader support to stakeholders to make sure that they have sufficient capacity and time to identify both the technology and finance to deliver new projects.
Great, thank you, Chris, for introducing this tool. Girish, few minutes for you. Any success stories that you would like to share, or maybe address the specific question on instruments for SMEs to rescale their workforce?
Yeah, I know you have just 3 or 4 minutes. Just in terms of the specific success stories or examples, I would just like to mention 2 things. One is that at least in India, many of the SMEs are looking forward or are actually already adopted quite a lot of rooftop solar programs. So because the solar is actually, PV prices have really come down quite a lot, solar photovoltaic rooftop. So we have a fairly ambitious solar rooftop program at a national level, and many SMEs are actually going in for substituting part of their grid requirement directly in a decentralized way by solar PV rooftop programs, maybe 10, 20, 30% on the electricity side. The second is, I think, a very nice one which has started is what, at least at the government level, has started it started last year, but now has picked up pace during this 5 or 6 months, is what the Bureau of Energy Efficiency at the government, central government level, started what are called the energy conservation guidelines for SMEs. So these are simple guideline tools. So there have been a series of webinars and events where they are trying to promote these EC guidelines, simple instruments or tools for the industries to start adopting that. So I just thought these are the two initial small things both on this. Now coming specifically to Leonardo's question on supporting instruments for SMEs for upskilling or reskilling, I think I can just mention that we at TERI really experimented quite a few times with these kind of reskilling or upskilling initiatives. We have adopted, I think, and they have been fairly successful in going to SME clusters and actually giving them hands-on training to the operators, workers on upskilling them for on greening their operations. And these are not long programs of a few days or something, just 3 or 4 hour program on a weekend or something late in the evenings, really going to them and really doing it in an informal way. And that has really helped the processes on how they're operating these workers. I think one talks about these e-modules. Yes, that is good for literate people, but for operators who are not really so e-savvy, as I talked earlier, there's no substitute to direct interaction with them hands-on at the ground level. Of course, the transaction cost would be too high in that case. But again, I think I'll come back to the point that that is probably the job of the governments and the bilateral institutions to develop such programs so that if you really want that recovery to happen. These are some of my initial thoughts. Thanks once again.
Great. Thank you. Very helpful and very insightful points that you all have written forward. I think you have given me more than enough material to report back to plenary. So let me thank you all for participating today, for providing your insights, and let us please all join back in the plenary room. Thank you again.
And so thanks very much. We have now, I guess, like 52 minutes or so for our discussion. And I guess we were just present with Giri's presentation from TERI. And just wanted to highlight that he mentioned the opportunities in India, of course, in technology, but also in business models. So that those are a couple of things that we have to have in mind for this discussion. But it's great to have here, such a breadth of experience and knowledge. We have people from the World Bank, from the Global Environment Facility, with a viewpoint from across the world, and of course an expert provider from the private sector, Mr. Langlois, and certainly from the Council, Disha, which is an expert on Indian topics, but across Southeast Asia. So with that, there are a couple of questions that we should have in mind when we are starting our discussion. And the first one would be, what are the opportunities and enablers to increase energy efficiency and renewable energy in micro, small, and medium enterprises? And are there any effective examples of interventions to achieve this? So I guess, given that we already hear from TERI, perhaps we can start with an overview worldwide. And perhaps let me ask Ming your opinion about this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Leandro. And I'd like to briefly talk about the GEF and then give you an example how the GEF has enabled the progress in SMEs in green energy, green economy development. And then finally, I will briefly look ahead on what the GEF is going to do in the next few years to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, let me quickly start with the introduction of the GEF. The GEF is a financial mechanism for multiple international or global environmental agreements or conventions, including the UNFCCC. Over the past 28 years, the GEF has financed more than 4,800 projects worldwide in 170 countries. And these projects widely cover SMEs in developing countries, particularly for the least developed countries. And with this 4,800 projects, the GEF provided more than $20 billion of grant and mobilized more than $112 billion co-financing. And all the money went to the developing country parties and mostly for the MSMEs. Now I'm going to take one project example of the GEF project example to demonstrate how the GEF has enabled the progress of these kind of SMEs. Recently, the GEF provided $10 million of grant to China to mobilize financing. I heard something in there, so I hope people can switch over there or close their speakers. Sorry. So the GEF money leveraged of more than $90 million. That means GEF $10 million mobilized $90 million, totally $100 million to finance in the Chinese rural communities, rural industries, mostly for the MSEs. So with this money, there are three things to do. Firstly, it is to enable the local community capacity and develop innovative policy that will incentivize the local communities, the private sector, to invest in green energy, in zero carbon energy for the green economy development in rural communities in China. And with this money, the GEF will demonstrate low carbon or zero carbon energy technologies, mostly combining with the renewable and energy efficiency technologies in 118 villages and the small towns, 3 towns, with a lot of and medium enterprises in there. So this project is ongoing. I believe it will be very good. I would like to share this kind of experience results after maybe a couple of years in another session of this kind of a discussion. Now, finally, let me look forward what is GEF is going to do to better cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. We will continue to finance zero carbon energy that will be incorporated with the country's green economy development. And this will be mostly in 6 areas or 6 aspects that will help local communities. Firstly, we will integrate the zero carbon energy into the zero carbon economy, local economy for the development. And then we will reduce energy costs for everyone, for every SMEs in there. And then we will combine the renewable energy and the energy efficiency technologies to build up a model, technology model and the finance model for zero carbon economic development countries. Then we will provide jobs for the MSEs and local communities. Finally, we will not only deliver global environmental benefits, but also local benefits, like a cleaner air for local communities. So this is the end of my short talk here. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Ming. Thanks very much. So I guess the main message from the GEF is that probably there's plenty of financial resources to invest in capacity building and perhaps transferring technology. So I guess in that sense, let me ask Asma and then Disha. Asma first. So what's the outlook for the young population, and how do you see this topic coming? How do you see MSMEs worldwide? And so what are the opportunities? And of course, the young people, the young population are the top enablers today if we are to see a deep decarbonized world. Asma.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Leonardo. So in my perspective, I see the enablers and opportunities can be categorized into three things. First, we have the opportunities that are already effective, then the opportunities that need to be enhanced, and the other thing are the opportunities that will enhance more this like participation and use of energy efficiency and renewable energy, which is not already existing. There are lots of enablers that are driving SMEs to adopt energy efficiency solutions and renewable energy, especially innovation, because when we talk about SMEs and startups, we are here talking about innovative products, about innovation, about innovative markets, about bringing something competitive and something new to the society and customers. So I see that nowadays SMEs, they are trying to use energy efficiency and renewable energy as a way towards innovation. Another thing is that there, like Mr. Mink said, there are lots of financing opportunities. There are grants, funding, investment, microfinancing. So for example, here in my country, Tunisia, we have like a whole policy for startups called the Startup Act, engaging youth into creating startups and providing them with incentives. These incentives can be tax incentives to reduce taxes for youth that and startups that are using energy efficiency and renewable energy solutions and integrating them into their businesses. And I also see that for SMEs, it is easier to use renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions as they are in the start of their businesses, as they are now growing, not like big firms, they are already in the maturity stage. So it is easier to adopt this change and to integrate this into their culture and to have like this mindset and create an employee behavior that encourages energy efficiency and renewable energy. And I have experienced this in multiple like projects and also startups here in Tunisia. They are using this and it's like becoming a mindset.
Well, that's great, Asma. So I guess, of course, there are short and medium and long run opportunities. Certainly, innovation should be key, as Asma was mentioning. But perhaps the strongest highlight that I would make from Asma is the role of fiscal policy to promote and to have an enabling environment for MSMEs. So let me ask you, Disha, of course, with the in mind, what are the opportunities and enablers to increase energy efficiency and renewable energy? But I guess from the standpoint of the council, which is used to analyze different policies and see what works and what doesn't work, and probably having that experience from Southeast Asia, what's your viewpoint about MSMEs and how to translate, let's say the incumbents, so existing MSMEs, and how do you embrace innovation and embrace renewable energy and energy efficiency across MSMEs?
Right. Thank you, Leonardo. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to be part of this discussion with all of you today. So I am Disha. I'm a program lead with the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, which is one of Asia's leading not-for-profit policy research institutes. So we are a 10-year-old organization now, and we use data integrated analysis and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. So I have been actually recently working quite a lot with the nodal ministries in India, trying to see how we can increase the share of renewable energy in the industrial sector, particularly, of course, focusing on solar, but more recently on bioenergy. So the countries here, India, as well as some of the other countries, Asian countries, we face these challenges of, for example, air pollution also, you have heard in recent years. So there is a massive opportunity to enable the economic utilization of agri residues or waste materials that are generated, and how these resources can be converted into useful energy to meet the demand in the industrial units, small, medium, micro enterprises. So what we have seen is that on the ground, we have seen some of these industrial units, they have shifted to bioenergy. For example, solid fuels, maybe pellets and briquettes, or even some of these now gaseous fuels in form of bio-CNG. We have actually seen massive savings in terms of cost if they transition to these fuels. Particularly, we have seen pharmaceutical companies, textile companies, they have almost reduced the cost to half. So the steam generation, most of these industries have thermal energy requirements, steam requirements, and if they shift from, say, coal or furnace oil, which are primary fossil fuels that are used in these industrial, small, medium industrial units, they are actually able to halve the cost of generating steam. That's the massive opportunity we have. So we actually don't see the need to give subsidies, because there is immense financial attractiveness and economic viability of shifting to these options. All what we need is, of course, some of these industrial units are small. They have traditionally lagged credit worthiness. So if they have to make certain upfront investments, they need access to loans. There are networks, formal banking systems, but most of these SMEs don't have access to the formal banking systems. So that's something which there are solutions that are available and can be discussed with policymakers, but more than that, I think it is what is required would be a strong demonstration program for these industrial units, because sometimes they lack this knowledge of technologies and the established use cases of using these renewable energy technologies for various use cases in industries, because each industrial unit and each industry is different from the other and they lack confidence in these technologies. So a strong demonstration program which can very well be possible. Like Ming said, there is no dearth of resources. So governments of these countries, some kind of collaboration can be explored to formulate a very strong demonstration program which can demonstrate these technologies in the local conditions and provide confidence to these smaller units that they can shift to these technologies and resources without disruption in their processes.
Yeah. So I guess in that sense, today specific technologies are decreasing in terms of cost. So one driver for MSMEs today would be competitiveness, because today is not a matter of cost in terms of the technology, but it's a matter of the credit worthiness of the MSME. So I guess that gives me a great opportunity to ask Dana from the World Bank. So how do you see, in terms of the risk of lending to this particular group of companies, MSME, how do you see that? And in that sense, So what are the opportunities and enablers to increase that energy efficiency and renewable energy? That today we have heard from Ming that there's ample resources in terms of finance. From ASMA, that the government has a role to play in terms of enabling the business environment. We have heard from Disha that today technologies are competitive, so perhaps it's just a matter of how to bring those financial services to MSMEs. So, Dana, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. So maybe what I'd like to do is to bring like one example of what we have done in this space in the past, and that sort of leads us what we're doing today, and also in the context of COVID-19. So I think when we talk about micro, small, and medium enterprises, we can look at it in the energy efficiency and renewable energy space. We can look at it in two ways: as the ones that are adopting these technologies, but also enormous success story about SMEs that actually are supplying these technologies, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit here today, because it's actually one market segment in the SMEs that are active in the energy access space that already have demonstrated that these SMEs can be the driving force of sustainable, clean, and resilient development. Something we talk about today a lot in the context of post-COVID-19 recovery. So if you look at it for decades, we have seen utilities, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, struggling to close energy access gap with electrification efforts barely keeping pace, and actually in many countries losing the race with the population growth. Then about 10 years ago, we have started to witness these technology breakthroughs that others have been talking about, with falling costs of solar PV technologies, emergence of LED lights, increasing innovations and falling costs in battery storage, and emergence of super efficient, energy efficient appliances. And, this really gave rise to more cost-effective and affordable distributed renewable energy solutions such as mini-grids and solar home systems. But this opportunity wasn't realized by big companies or utilities, but rather by startup SMEs. And it is actually largely thanks to these SMEs that energy access started to pick up and eventually accelerated in sub-Saharan Africa, and that achieving universal access to electricity by the target year of 2030 is now possible. In countries like Kenya, that have about 7% electrification rate, about 2/3 of these connections came from the grid, and a third from off-grid technologies through SMEs. In countries like Uganda and Myanmar, about half. But going to the question, it is important to highlight that these SMEs couldn't, as much as innovative and as much as creative they couldn't actually make the success on their own, and that efforts to build enabling framework, enabling environment in parallel is really needed. So, for example, when this process started 10 years ago, we have set up the World Bank Group has Africa program that has been expanded to Lighting Global. And the whole point of this program was to identify and start removing all market barriers that these companies face. So basically, we started with information. We put together a very comprehensive market research program to get better information to these companies about how to really serve these customers. What do customers really need? What kind of they have? Moved into quality assurance program, developing quality standards and testing methods for these products that just didn't exist. And without that, it was impossible to say which, and there was a risk that the markets will be filled with low quality products and kill those markets even before they start. Helping the companies with access to finance, educating consumers, and working with the governments to integrate these technologies into their electrification programs and build enabling environments. So So it's this basically this kind of it's not just one thing that is needed, right? It's a comprehensive effort to see where the barriers are and then look into how these barriers can be mitigated in different ways. And as a result, really, this industry boomed, and today it's a $1 billion industry, largely still consisting of SMEs, and serving low-income households and rural and peri-urban areas, especially in Africa. And we see that this industry has tremendous potential to play now in the COVID recovery, because they can bring electricity to remote places, into households, but also to micro and small enterprises, and really drive the energy access development in a way that is both more inclusive and more resilient, and build basically this resilience to the future shocks, because I think COVID-19 has shown to us what impacts we have by the healthcare facilities and schools not having electricity, not being able to do digital learning, the impact that lack of energy has on agriculture and food security, and so on. But at the same time, of course, these SMEs are now in most at risk, or all SMEs today, right, are most at risk because of COVID-19, because they are still relatively small. They are a nascent industry. Their original sources of funding have disappeared, while the revenues have plummeted because they are income consumers that don't have deep pockets, and increasingly find it very difficult to pay for electricity. So we are also now participating in a monumental effort that is driven by 15 organizations. We are one of them, DFIs, private investors, foundations, to set up an energy access relief fund to basically help these SMEs to survive the crisis, so that they can be the driving force for the post recovery as well. But sort of to your question, really, so it is about thinking about this enabling environment that obviously includes finance. And today, for example, 10 years ago, we were unable to finance these companies because they were just too nascent, too small. It was difficult to find a way how to integrate it in large programs that the World Bank is financing. But today we have more than $1 billion portfolio that is financing mini-grids and off-grid solar companies with that are mostly going through governments, but for the support to SMEs in this sector. And it is because for the first few years, it was not only about financing, but we have been focusing on all these market barriers and finding ways how to create more conducive enabling environment, and that's something that continues being an important piece of supporting SMEs in the energy sector.
Dana, so that's really helpful, and I really enjoyed very much the case of Lighting Africa. So, working on enhancing information, doing a little bit of market research, training and quality assurance for enabling MSMEs to actually deliver the product they would like to deliver to specific places. And of course, access to finance certainly is something that, of course, there's plenty of resources, as Ming was saying, but probably there should be a blend in that finance, because you really need to understand what are the idiosyncrasies locally and what are the specific opportunities and challenges in that location. So thanks very much for that. And then let me turn to Pierre. Pierre comes from the private sector. So I guess my question would be, perhaps, can you elaborate on how can you identify the best business model for a particular area? And of course, having in mind that the question is, what are the opportunities and enablers to increase energy efficiency and renewable energy? But, given that you're a businessman, what's the business model appropriate for MSMEs, but also depending upon the location? And how can you identify and extract these ingredients to have an enabling cocktail for MSMEs? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'll build a lot on. Yes, you hear me well? That's good. Okay. So, well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes,
okay,
sure.
Thank you. So, thank you for the opportunity, and I'll build on what Dana said quite a lot. The SME sector is particularly challenged because even though over the years there's been a lot of mechanism that's been developed to try to implement energy efficiency at different level, naming energy performance contracting as an example, or grant mechanism, otherwise in countries that can afford such grant, the outreaching to the actual beneficiary has been the challenge. For example, ESCOs has been targeting mainly bigger clients, either public or private sector, because of the size of the opportunity and the transaction costs associated with them. When you try to address SMEs, obviously that does not match up because the opportunity is too small and the transaction costs are too high. And I'll give you just a very simple example on the other end. In Canada, there's more than $1 billion provided as far as grants for any type of consumers. And we're outreaching for less than 5% of the market. And essentially the one that's been the most difficult to target is the residential and the SME sector. Even though the grants are there and they're very generous, they can go from 25%, even sometimes to 75% of the total investment. Still, these grants are not necessarily used by the targeted market. And the reason for that, they're difficult to outreach to. First of all, they're small, so they don't very often even have the resources to know about the opportunities, know about the programs and all that. They don't have the technical capacity necessarily to identify opportunities and use the mechanism that we offer. So the market has shifted quite a lot related to new type of approaches. What Dano mentioned is great, obviously, and they're looking at every angle possible, not only on the supplier side, but the client side, to offer them a comprehensive approach, including financing. For example, direct install program, which goes into an SME and not offer only the technical knowledge to identify opportunities, but also some kind of financial mechanism, helps quite a lot because it's a very simplified approach where you outreach the people at the same time as on the technical side as the financial side, and you help them move forward with some technologies that are very often very, very simple. There are still opportunities in lighting, for example, that are very, very simple and not technically challenging. They're still not tapped on, essentially because people do not know, they don't have the time, they don't have the knowledge, they have fear, they lack financing capacity, or they're not very necessarily financially viable as far as businesses. So there's a huge challenge there. And I think mechanism will have to evolve quite a lot. One of which I can think of is energy as a service. And not only on the ESCO side, which is bigger, but essentially we have to make energy available as energy is available. So when you think about someone connected to the grid and buy electricity, it's rather simple when you think about it. But when you want to offer them non-consumption, non-energy consumption, then it becomes a lot more complex because technology-wise, financing-wise, the difficulty internally to implement and the fear of changing things that may not disrupt only their energy consumption, great, but as well their business as usual become a big factor. So energy as a service as a concept, I mean energy efficiency as a service as a concept, meaning try to make this as simple as possible and outreaching these SMEs in a way that it's financially viable is really what we're all aiming to. And I think what Dano mentioned about the work of the World Bank is great because it definitely goes into that direction. But even in OECD countries, it's still very challenging to address that specific market. Through grants, through information, through improving the offer, it's still quite a big challenge because of the number and the diversity of the type of clients that we're looking at.
really great, Pierre. I really appreciate those comments, and especially discussing the case of Canada, which, you know, it's a developed country, but also there are similarities for developing countries in terms of the scale of MSMEs. Probably they are too small. They have technical capacity limited, so that's also the case worldwide. So I guess in terms of opportunities or enablers to increase energy efficiency and renewable energy, probably should we discuss about sector-specific or class of activities to try to increase the scale of MSMEs? Would that make sense, Pierre?
Yeah, and there's different ways to do that. You're totally right. One of the ways to address these barriers is scaling it up one way or the other. One of which would be, as I was talking about, the direct install program. You don't look at deep retrofit at the SME because it becomes very challenging. So you may look at the transversal type of approach where you offer one product and you try to bundle them. So you say, well, we'll just offer, I don't know, efficient chiller. And then instead of going through every SME and trying to address everything that can be done in one sector, you address it by technology and you try to regroup the technologies together. So a direct install program can be addressing only one technology. And in developing countries, you may talk about just lighting or about just replacing motors or compressed air. You just target it and you just go from one to the other, and you bundle it at the manufacturer level, at the financial level, the banks, and they only focus on one technology, but you bundle all these little opportunities into bigger ones. So that's one of the ways to do that is on the technology base. You can develop it on a sector base. So you can say, well, we'll address all these type of clients, and then we'll try to bundle them one with the other. But you're totally right. Transaction costs, financing costs, risk associated has to be limited in a way that are addressable by the stakeholders. So trying to, for example, we work a lot with financial institutions to try to bring them to finance things. When if they say finance energy efficiency, it becomes something huge. If you say just finance the replacement of small chillers, then it becomes something a lot more simple because technology-wise, they will understand it better. They will address more the risk better, and then they can target specific clients. So it limits the complexity while at the same time having a large enough market. So bundling, trying to address the market in different ways and innovative ways, referring again to Dana and the lighting program they had in Africa, has been one of this kind of way where you're addressing a program, you're addressing a market, you're addressing a technology, you're trying to make it as simple as possible to all stakeholders, and then you deploy. So it's still a very big challenge, and Dana will confirm that it's not been easy for sure, but it's still in the right way. You try to address it in a way that is acceptable for these SMEs, which is the real challenge there.
That's really great, Pierre. And I guess from the first question, we have plenty of, and you know, there are different available opportunities. But I guess in terms of the enabling environment and the opportunities, certainly aggregation in MSMEs can work for scale, but also for access to finance to decrease the risk of a particular MSME, and also to provide a larger service to increase, of course, the competitiveness of that particular aggregated MSME. So this is a great discussion. So let me ask you in reverse order now, Pierre. So what do you think would be the industrial growth opportunities for MSMEs to participate in energy efficiency and renewable energy value chain? You mentioned already this new business model, the one that it's focused on energy efficiency as a service. But within that energy efficiency and renewable energy, what would be the key areas to focus for MSMEs? And perhaps if you have a breakdown in terms of regions or particular segments of value chain, that would be great.
Well, because of what I mentioned as far as SMEs, that they're more difficult to target, it means that the opportunity is larger. When you go to bigger industries, usually, even though there's still a lot of potential, and we all know that there's potential everywhere, but bigger industries, bigger organizations that have more the technical and financial capacity have usually addressed it a little bit one way or the other. They're the one grabbing the biggest part of the grants, for example. They're the one that are easiest to finance. They're the one that has the most technology capacity. So normally there's still a lot of potential, and very often they don't look at the payback period they're looking at is still very short. And if we really want to decarbonize, then you will have to look at 10, 15 years paybacks and not only the 1-2 years. But the SME sector, because of all the barriers, the bright side of it, that's where there's the most potential. That's where you can reach the 20, 30, 40, 50% savings. And because the technology is there, and most of them have done almost nothing. So it means the potential is there. The challenge, again, is how to address it. And I would just raise one point, and maybe others have faced the same thing, but it's not a technology issue at some point, because technology, even though we can develop it furthermore, and I'm sure there's a lot of places to do that, the technology available today can do a lot. Like, we can really decrease the amount of energy consumed to achieve the same task with the current technology. It's not a matter of knowledge either, because we know how to develop it and we know how to implement it. It's a matter of outreach. So the challenge in any kind of country, any kind of SME market, is how to outreach them. So that's where the government has a huge role, because through energy efficiency agencies, through ministries, they're able to develop furthermore energy efficiency as a solution, and an acceptable solution which people will start to know about and understand. But the thing I wanted to throw in, and I would love the others to address that as well, is the accounting part of energy efficiency, which sounds a little bit technical, but whatever you do at some point, you always bring a debt to a client when you lend to them, because they borrow money to do something. So we're on the demand side. And accounting in the last 40 years has moved in a direction that's preventing the implementation of energy efficiency, because when you have the supply side, it's a service. When I refer to energy as a service, you just buy a service. You have no debt. It's not preventing you to borrow money. Otherwise, the banks don't care if you buy energy as long as you pay them on a monthly basis. But when you try to do energy efficiency, think about any technology, and you lend the organization money to implement, then all of a sudden they have a loan. And we all know that SMEs and big organizations have limited capacity for borrowing. And the banks usually look at asset-based financing. They look at what you have, and there's a limit of what they were going to lend to you. And energy efficiency becomes a liability because you have to borrow money. So the SMEs will look at it and say, well, energy efficiency might be nice, but I have other things to do. So if I do one, I cannot do the other one. And in our world, I think we have to make energy accessible, not that you have to do either energy efficiency or invest in your business. It should be you can invest in your business and you can do energy efficiency. And accounting, without going into too much detail, has moved away from that, and making sure that any way we implement an energy efficiency project, it becomes a liability, and it limits the attractiveness. So maybe I'm talking a little bit, it's a little bit technical, but I feel that no one really addressed the point of accounting. And one point that I would love to spend time on is work with the accounting community to find a way to get energy efficiency perceived as a service and not as a liability in any country, because accounting, obviously, in any SME becomes the hard bone, the heart of what they're doing. If they cannot borrow money, even though they want to do something, they just cannot do it. So it's a little bit outside of what you asked me, but I think I would love at some point someone to raise that issue and work with the accounting community to make our work as energy efficiency practitioners more simple.
Great, thanks very much, Peter. So in that particular, so in terms of industrial growth opportunities, you see the role of the regulators as fundamental. I mean, again, these accounting principles should be something that is dealt with at the government level. So I guess in that sense, you also promote a stronger regulation to actually help and enable energy efficiency and renewable energy. So thanks very much for that, Pierre. And let me now turn again to Ming to ask you about, the industrial growth opportunities. We already discussed that probably aggregation in MSMEs could play a role to actually help MSMEs to consolidate as the powerhouse of the economies that they should be, and they should be spearheading innovation, as Asma was mentioning about the case in Tunisia or Disha, in some other cases. So what do you think about this opportunity, Ming, and where should VEF start work in?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you everyone else for sharing the experience and information. I think I'd like to take this opportunity to build on the shoulder of the speakers and to share with you one project example I have experienced in Africa, in Algeria. That example will bring this kind of financing, technology, SMEs model together. I think this is a good opportunity for me to share that. I did not prepare for that because I heard you everyone giving me this incentive to talk about the example. Okay, about 2 years ago, I went to Nigeria to shop around these opportunities for GF to finance the rural electrification model or best practice and projects in Nigeria. So I visited a number of villages, very poor villages in most part of Nigeria. And I found that, these villages still did not have power to use in there yet. So I went there, and also I visited a number of villages which are electrified already. Different villages in there. So I found these villages are there are a lot of potential there. Firstly, there's plenty of solar energy, sunshine, about maybe more than 300 days per year. And some very good resources in there. And there are a lot of spare land around the villages. Not in use, not in cultivation yet. So, and a lot of people did not have anything to do. So this is a very good opportunities for the development for the solar energy for the rural communities. But the people did not have power in that case. So what shall we do? I look at the villages, a very small enterprise. There is kind of a food processing house. They use 2 engines that were produced in England over 100 years ago. So it's a kind of diesel engine power to process the food. Very, very simple. Crush this food in the processing that, and there is another house, a bakery house, to prepare the bread, and using charcoals from mountain forest. This is a very bad situation. So I think so I propose to have the one chance for development for solar energy. So I engaged a local company, and this is a very good local company in there, and the private company. They finance the mini grids projects nearby in another village, and he told me if the interest rate of the bank, locally bank, can give the loan no more than 10% per year, he can invest in this village to build up this kind of solar PV mini grids to provide this kind of electricity to the power to the village. But the local, the country at that time, the bank interest is over 16%. So there is a big gap, because the inflation rate in Nigeria at that time was very high. So I was thinking how to fill the gap of the interest rate. So I called the World Bank and the African Development Bank and the local government bank together, and I tried to ask them to put some money in there, and maybe 11% or 12% interest, and the GF can put a limited amount of grant so that the private company can have the loan of like 10% or 9% of the loan. So that's what I've done. So with that,
Sorry to interrupt, but you all have to go back to the plenary. The time is up. It's already 3:11, so we are all waiting for you at the plenary. So sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. So I quickly went up this. So the chief will finance this kind of mini grid power project in these African and LDC countries. This is a good example of how to blend this financing with the bank, World Bank, and African Bank. I mean, the resources, the opportunities, everything is in there. The problem is how to have a good model, business model, financial model. Technologies are in there already. People's willingness to use the clean energy there. So I stop here. Sorry. Thank you.
So let me just finish with one word for Asma, Disha, and Dana. The ladies will have the last word. And we can start with Dana. One word only.
I'm so sorry, Leonardo. This is not possible because all the other moderators are waiting for you. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, just one word. What would you say, Dana, Disha, quickly? One word.
Of course, energy-enabled services rather than selling energy.
One word.
Resilient MSME sector we should aim for.
Asma?
Asma, you muted yourself.
We can't
You're
hear
muted,
them.
Asma. One word.
And
Excellent.
incentive.
Cost effectiveness, resiliency, and blending
Energy-enabled services.
Energy-enabled services.
So we start with the global perspective. Tarek, please.
Thank you very much. It was a rich discussion and conversation, and I'm not sure I can do justice to my team or to my panelists in terms of synthesizing the conversation. Again, and the global perspective, we zoomed into the broader question of the integration of sustainable energy as means to enable SMEs to contribute to the COVID-19 recovery. And that took us into specific sort of questions of what are the policy advice that we can give to governments on sort of linking the stimulus package for supporting small and medium manufacturing enterprises and job creation and recovery with the low carbon options and technologies. And of course, the conversation hovered on a number of vectors. One vector is looked at potentially the need for understanding the demand side and focusing on the demand from the perspective of SMEs, knowing their constraints and limitations. So stimulus packages targeting large industry is completely different than SMEs. So there we have to be quite cognizant of the cash flow constraints. So financing measures and financing incentives to catalyze sort of demand among SMEs for renewable energy or energy efficiency needs to tackle and be cognizant of the decision-making process within these SMEs. Examples were provided in terms of cash rebate programs for equipment replacement, etc. Others, for example, a push for electrification of heat was flagged as a need to be sort of thought of in terms of not as a universal option, but we have to be also aware of other technological options available to countries where the co-benefits of jobs and greening needs to be combined. So maybe thermal technologies could provide this kind of balance between public policy objectives of creating jobs and also greening. So we need to always think in terms of these combined policy objectives on the one hand, to stimulate demand, boost the economies, create jobs, but also greening. So we need to be cognizant of the possibilities there. And finally, of course, there's much more to the discussion. Finally, let me also zoom on another vector where brought in also by the perspective of the ongoing conversation by the International Energy Agency on the role that energy efficiency can play in terms of catalyzing jobs and as an important vector within the stimulus packages. Of course, broad analysis of stimulus packages show that so far until now, the pickup or the uptake of green recovery measures have been actually slow and not convincing. If you look at especially the large stimulus packages that have been deployed in the last 6 to 7 months. So we need to do a little bit more homework to bring a bit more robust business case to policymakers on how this how the linkages to energy efficiency, for example, can tackle multiple benefits in terms of job creation, SME recovery, and low carbon trajectory. I think I would stop here to give room to the others. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tariq. Very great, excellent summary. Now we go to Katarina to see what happened in the country perspective section.
Great, thank you, Nilgün. Well, I had the pleasure in hearing very insightful inputs from China, South Africa, and India. The speakers, all of them have highlighted the role of SMEs and the fact that they are actually a backbone of national economies. For instance, the figure from South Africa that we got was that 65% of all national workforce is actually employed by SMEs. So I think all of them do agree on the importance. The challenges that all of them are facing when it comes to recovery due to COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, from India, we heard that there is no baseline, that the government does not have a database of all the SMEs, and especially there is a big unofficial sector that it's very difficult to track, and therefore the baseline numbers are difficult to establish. Then another challenge that appears in all cases is lack of capital, lack of cash flow, which really impacts the resilience of SMEs. Then the third major challenge that we heard was no risk mitigation measures. So none of the countries had really in place a certain framework that would help SMEs mitigate the risks and the changing circumstances that pandemic has brought in beginning of this year. However, we did hear some very good strategies from all the countries on how to address the current situation and how to make the most of the energy industrial synergy. So the first point that was highlighted was utilizing technologies. We even heard about the tool on recognizing green technologies that was developed by EBRD as a way to mitigate the risks for investors when they are investing in a certain innovative technology. Then we heard about the role of financing and financial mechanisms that can be established both by different governments, but also the grant schemes that can be brought on board by international organizations. The third strategy was regarding the skills and the labor force, how this can be adjusted to the new situation. So for instance, we heard a very good success story from South Africa, where manufacturing SME was able to implement an online KPI dashboard. And by just doing this, they were able to reduce the scrap of their production by 85%. So there was intervention, timely intervention there to kind of reskill their labor force and approach towards production. Fourth point was the role of innovation. How can the importance of bringing on board innovative technologies And then the fifth and final point was the importance of sector-specific measures. So for instance, we heard from India a success story about the government scheme of introducing solar rooftop as a way for productive uses of industry. So I think I will stop here and pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katerina. Great summary as well. Leonardo, without losing time, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Milgon. Thanks very much, Milgon. And I will challenge one of the points that Katarina made, because in my breakout room, you know, the first big point was that there are ample financial resources. So there's no lack of finance. And I guess in that sense, part of the challenges were there should be a role for fiscal policy to actually create a conducive environment. Certainly, there are different technologies, but probably there are specific technologies that can help MSMEs. For instance, PV, solar PV, or bioenergy, which you know, in terms of scale, it's easier for MSMEs to undertake. The other part is competitiveness and credit worthiness, which probably those are in conflict at some point. But in terms of credit worthiness, what we discussed is that certainly scale is part of the challenge for MSMEs, and technical capacity is somewhat limited. So one alternative that we reached there was aggregation in MSMEs. So probably that can deal with the scale issue and also the technical capacity issue. And also, not only aggregation in MSMEs, perhaps focusing on a given sector or a technology, but also bundling a specific product to provide a larger service or a larger product. And in that sense, one new business model is, of course, energy efficiency as a service, or renewable energy or energy as a whole as a service. So in that sense, if you can aggregate SMEs and you can bundle the service, that can deal with the challenge of the credit worthiness of that particular group. And then, of course, the other part that we discussed as well is the role of blending finance. And perhaps, you know, probably local finance would be more conservative in terms of providing lending to MSMEs. But if there's a role for international financial institutions, governments, and local banking institutions to blend, then you know, the cost of access to finance would be decreased. And then probably there is why I am challenging Katerina on the lack of finance component. Electrification, of course, in terms of dynamics globally of the sector, is one of the key areas for MSMEs, given the scale that MSMEs represent in terms of the productive capacity in each of the countries, and they are present across the whole value chain. So, and finally, there are three elements that, two elements that I picked up. And then, of course, is resilience, enabling energy services, but also we should focus on existing MSMEs and startup MSMEs. And startup MSMEs are the ones that are more open to embrace new business models and to blend or to aggregate or to bundle, whereas the incumbent MSMEs are a little bit more on the culture, existing culture. And I guess one area of opportunity that we discussed there is of course, capacity building to help deliver these new business models, this new technology, and these new opportunities of team collaboration for them to actually increase size, become more credit worthy, and of course, in the end, the opportunity there is for MSMEs to become or to consolidate as the powerhouse of the economies worldwide. Thanks very much, Nilgün.
Thank you, Leonardo. Excellent summary as well. I have now 2 minutes to contribute my observations as I was moving around and after listening to Girish. Clearly, SMEs are a massive group in every economy. They create huge amount of jobs, and they have to be considered both as on the recipient side as the for renewable energy and energy efficiency, but they are also technology providers. So it's important to, particularly for low-income households or more decentralized applications. So clearly, everybody talked about enabling environment within which grants such as direct financial measures or fiscal measures like tax reductions would be important. On the capacity side of the MSMEs, everyone in all 3 sessions, I heard the word quality assurance, whether it's a risk mitigation measure for investors into startup, the more dynamic, the new SMEs as technology suppliers, or to ensure that whoever is the end consumer, that they get a quality product if it is produced by the SME. So I have another 30 seconds. So overall, everyone emphasized that the SME sector has this untapped potential, both as consumers of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies and assistance, and as suppliers of these technologies, as well as in services such as maintenance, repair, and so on. So definitely huge potential, and the recovery efforts should not forget them, as because most governments tend to focus on the large enterprises, but SMEs are a force to reckon with and will help make recovery really green. So with that, thank you all of you, everyone who has participated, of course our speakers, our moderators of the session. With that, I wish all of you a good evening, a good afternoon, or still a good morning. Thank you.